I spoke last week about Gilgal and the Gilgal Project,
Yes.
which is where our fellowship is going. I want to pull back out a little bit further this week, and I want to talk to you about a ministry initiative that is based on Exodus 17. And I'll save that for the back end because I think there's some real personal applications to this particular passage as well. Folks, one of the greatest things we can do, especially in our neighborhood, especially with the people that are around, is to encourage them, to help them, to be a helper, right? To whoever. But there's a ministry aspect to that as well. We have the opportunity as followers of Jesus Christ to come alongside other believers to help them in their walk and their mission as well. And I want to talk to you about that today. Related to this passage from Exodus 17, verses 8 through 13. And again, the title is Lift Them Up. Let me read the passage to you, and then it might make a little bit of sense what I'm talking about. Verse 8, 17. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, "Choose us some men, and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Now you talk about just an obscure little passage of the Old Testament. That's pretty much it. But there's so much here that I've been encouraged about over the last number of years. But let's break it down a bit. First off, who's Amalek?
You're right.
Amalek. Well, another name for Amalek are the Amalekites. Right? That's probably a name you might be familiar with, the Amalekites. The name Amalek refers to a descendant of Esau. We read about Amalek in Genesis 36:12. Who's Esau? Well, you had Abraham, you had his son Isaac, and then he had Jacob and Esau were his sons. Jacob was the son of promise. He was the one that had the 12 sons, and then that became Israel. Esau went the other way.
Is he the one that wrestled with God?
Jacob did.
Yeah.
Jacob did. If you recall about that, you know, Jacob stole the birthright from Esau and all that kind of thing. And there was a lot of the word we like in the Bible is enmity between Jacob and Esau.
And trickery.
Yeah, but Esau had also, we read before the stealing of the birthright, he had really despised his birthright. And so he didn't really care about it as much. And so, but the descendants of Esau, not just Amalek, but others, essentially, while they were relatives of Israel, they also warred with Israel quite a bit. And you can actually read about that in some of the prophetic books, the minor prophets especially. As a matter of fact, they sometimes celebrated Israel's defeat, and God wasn't very pleased with them about that. They were a nomadic people, and they were based in. Do you guys have a map in the back of your Bible at all?
Yes.
Well, I'll show you mine because it might make some sense. If you have a map that looks like this, where Israel's up here, and this is the Sinai Peninsula, right? This is Egypt over here, and so you have the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba here. This is southern Israel. Beersheba is kind of southern Israel. If I can give you another map that might make some sense out of that. This is Israel, right? Southern Israel is down here. Okay, so on this map, that's here. the Amalekites, basically their homeland was just south of Israel in the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula. That's where they roamed about, in the desert. Okay? Now, the attack that we read about in this passage actually happened way down here in the south, not too far from Mount Sinai. Okay, that's Rephidim. So they had traveled quite a distance through the desert to get to Israel in this particular case. So that desert is called the Negev, N-E-G-E, the Negev, southern Israel. And what's interesting about the Amalekites is they attacked Israel more than once. And as it turns out, King Saul, who we talked about a bit last week, had been assigned the task of destroying the Amalekites, which he did not do. And that led to his ultimate downfall. Their king was a guy, it's not really a name, it's more a title, Agag. Now, where you see Agag show up later, just to find out that the Amalekites hung around for a while, is Haman, who we also mentioned last week, from the book of Esther, the bad guy who wanted to destroy Israel. He was referred to as Haman the Agagite. And so we believe that even he might have been an Amalekite. And so they kind of hung around and hung around and hung around, and as often these people did. But these are the Amalekites, so they're an enemy of Israel. Why did they attack so far south? They must have felt like Israel was a threat to them. So before they got to their homeland, they headed south and attacked. More on them in a couple of minutes, because there's a couple of other aspects to this that kind of fit into the narrative. So here's the situation. We're in Exodus 17. It's only been a month since, or so-ish. We're not exact on the times, but we know it's within less than 2 months since Israel had left Egypt, had crossed the Red Sea, and was on the beginning of their journey across the wilderness, which should have only taken a few months instead of 40 years, but there you go. So we're fairly close to that, and now they're down in the southern Arabian desert. The Amalekites attack, and Moses tells Joshua to form an army while he goes up on the hillside. This is the first mention of Joshua in the Bible. Okay, Joshua the son of Nun, right?
Wasn't he one of the sons who could have died if his parents hadn't put the blood on the doorpost? He was the firstborn son.
Okay. Is that described earlier in Exodus?
I can't tell you where I remember reading it. But I remember
Okay, I
reading
have to go look that up too, but this is the first time he's mentioned in there, in the book. So, think about it. At this point, he's been perhaps an assistant of Moses. It seems like he was. That's what his job was.
Joshua?
Joshua?
Wasn't he the one who wrestled with God though?
No.
No.
Oh, that's the other one.
It was Jacob.
That's
Jacob. Yeah.
You do what I do, man. All these
James.
Bible names here. Yeah, keep them straight. But yeah, Joshua would end up being his assistant and ultimately would be the one that led them into the promised land. But this is his first assignment at war. Okay? So he said, you go put these guys together. And we never really find out why Joshua was, I mean, God just picked him, I suppose. But, you know, what his particular skill set was that made him a military leader. But he certainly was an effective military leader. And so he calls him to pull together the troops. Now, over in Deuteronomy 25, and you can go there if you want, but I'll jump over there real quick because I want to read this to you because there's some question just exactly about this. Remember, Deuteronomy is a retelling of the law. So Deuteronomy retells some of what we see earlier in the Pentateuch, right? Exodus, Numbers. And here's what Moses, Deuteronomy 25, 17 through 19. Here's what Moses says in Deuteronomy 25, 17. He says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt. How they met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks. All the stragglers at your rear when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around, and the land which the Lord your God has given you as to possess as an inheritance, that you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under the heaven. You shall not forget. They didn't do that. But the despicable part of this is that they came around the back with the old and the infirm, and they were picking off people on the back of the crowd, this million-odd people that were marching through the desert, and they're taking out the old people and the sick people in the back. That's pretty despicable,
Yeah.
if you think about it, right? And so, it seemed to be what they were doing. Now, there was a question about the fact that they attacked them multiple times. So was it this time that they did that? Not entirely certain, but the reality is that was one of their methods. So, you got to think about it too. They'd only been out of Egypt a couple of months. They hadn't, you have to remember the timeline. It was a couple of years in that they sent the spies to go check the land out. And
Joshua was one of them.
And Joshua and Caleb were the two that said, let's go. The other
Yeah.
10 said, let's not.
Yeah.
The crowd sided with them, and they rebelled, and they all died in the desert. But at this point, everybody that came out of Egypt, other than whoever got picked off right here, they were still with them. So they had all of these people in all these conditions. And so you got to think they had a lot of old and infirm people that came out of Egypt. So that's what we're dealing with. And so he sends Joshua to put an army together of guys who'd never been in an army, and Aaron and Hur join him on the hilltop. All right, so that's the conditions that we have going on here. And so with this, guys, I just want to say to you this morning, I see there's probably a lot of other points, but the three that kind of jumped out to me in this passage when it comes to the idea of victory, because this is a physical victory, but it's reflective of spiritual warfare, right? Where you've got God's chosen being attacked by those against God and what his plan is. So it's very much a picture of a spiritual battle. And I think we see three real important truths here. Number one, we shouldn't expect victory to always come easy. And I think that sidelines a lot of believers when they get in a battle and God doesn't just deliver them right away. And they're like, God let me down. God let me down. Well, nobody ever said. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. Right? We're going to run into things, so it's always not easy. Now let's go back and look at this passage, because there's a couple of things you got to know that doesn't come right out of this passage. Number one, the Amalekites were experts at riding camels.
Oh.
They were a nomadic people. They were in the desert, and they were camel riders. Some have suggested that they actually were the first to domesticate camels, but it seems like that was probably before them. But they were absolutely able to ride them. So imagine, you've got a bunch of Israelites wandering around on foot,
Right.
tired, trying to look out for grandma and the kids and everything like that, and they're running around, you know, and then you got these camels riding in, right? I mean, talk about more mobile and faster. And even when they started to battle them, these guys were out there, these guys weren't soldiers. And they've got these guys riding around with camels. Have you ever watched any of those old movies like Braveheart or something? And you got the guys on the ground, but you got the guys on horses. They're a whole lot more mobile.
Right.
And they're running, or the Patriot, right? I remember Patriot was like that. Those guys that I did like the dragoons, right? And they're coming along with their swords, and they're just. So you got that going on.
Are they
And-
the guys with the red hats?
Who?
The Amalekites.
Amalekite? I have no idea.
You know,
They-
with they have a red, like a sheik, like
Yeah.
a
Oh,
hat,
shepherd.
like a Bedouin.
Yeah, maybe. They were definitely like Bedouins, so I would imagine they probably looked something like that.
And they were using swords? What,
We don't know that part.
yeah.
We don't know that
what they
part.
were.
But, you know, even if they're using sticks, if you're on a camel, I guarantee you I can get around
Oh,
you
yeah,
faster than
absolutely.
right? Not to
Especially
mention
in
the
the
fact,
sand,
Israel had
yeah.
been in the desert a short period of time.
Right.
That wasn't their
Too.
milieu, if you will. And so they're trying to fight in the desert against these guys. And so what you see is, based on what we see, is the battle goes back and forth and back and forth. And can't that be the way it is when we're in a spiritual battle? That we have victory for a while, then it falls back. And then we come forward and it falls back. And just when you think you're out, you get clobbered again, right? I mean, that's the way it is. But I'm going to give you one New Testament passage for today, and it's actually one that's one of my very, very favorite passages. It's in Galatians chapter 6. And believe me, I lean on this passage more than I care to tell you. Galatians chapter 6. And this is the principle of sowing and reaping, which is what people misbrand as karma in our world.
Yeah.
And I try to always correct people when I'm not being a jerk, because people say, "Oh, that's karma." I say, "No, that's sowing and reaping. It's a different thing." Listen to it. Verse 7 of chapter 6 in Galatians. He says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will reap. For he sows to the flesh, will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit, will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." And here's the verse, because this one, I got to tell you guys, I pray this quite often. "And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart." And guys, I pray that so often. I say, "Lord, I know that I'm doing what you called me to do. I know that I'm sowing good. Lord, give me the strength to not lose heart." Now, I also have to have enough discernment to realize sometimes I'm just doggone hard-headed. And maybe we shouldn't be going this route. But that's the Lord giving you wisdom.
And
to know
also,
that.
that's a farmer's,
Yes,
that's a farmer's law of gravity.
absolutely.
So to speak. Because, well, I heard Pastor, he say when he was a boy, his dad said, "Okay, plant this corn, it's gotta be in a straight row, and so the seed's so much far apart from the other one." Well, he thought he'd be a smart aleck, then you can go play. Well, he thought he'd be a smart aleck, he just kinda dug a hole and threw them all in there.
Yeah.
Went out and played. Well, that next year, they didn't have any food to eat. It was a hard lesson, because it was back in the, when they needed the food to eat.
Yeah. Well, it's a blessing that the Israelites were an agrarian society. They understood about husbandry and about farming and vegetables and plants and those kinds of things. And so, but, the victory is not always going to come easy, but you've got to stay at it. If you're doing what God has called you to do, you stay at it. And that's the point. They didn't give up. They kept battling. Number two, and this goes back to what we're talking about. Victory is won at the spiritual level. So oftentimes when you're in a spiritual battle, you don't always see it. You see the physical, right? You got somebody that's just tormenting you, for example, right? A lot of us have stopped working, but you had somebody in your office that was just on you,
Digging
on
at
you,
you,
on
yeah.
you, right? Or a
Oh,
client
right.
or whatever like that. And you sometimes had to step back and realize, this is bigger than them. This is bigger than them. There's something going on here. I was reading one commentary on this passage by a writer named J. Alec Moyer, and he notes that the battle was not won on the plain where they were fighting. The battle was actually won up on the hill where Moses was. Right? You see that. As long as that staff was up, they were victorious. The Israelites were outmatched and they were unprepared. Think about it. 2 or 3 months earlier, they had essentially been enslaved brick masons. That's what they were doing. Right? We know that from Moses. They were making bricks. That's what they did for the Egyptians to be able to build all their projects. And here they are now being cast to be soldiers. And the question has been asked, and nobody knows because the Bible doesn't talk about it, exactly how many weapons did the Israelites have at that point? It's doubtful they had forged a bunch of swords. And so, we talk about the idea, we see it in Scripture, pounding your plowshares into swords.
Yeah.
Right? So, but they didn't have plowshares at this point.
Right.
Because remember, they had basically gone out of Egypt with the clothes on their back, plus whatever they were able to get from the Egyptians.
Which probably were not weapons.
Probably not. We think more it was like precious type things, right? So they could use to trade and what have
Since
you.
they're in the desert, though, resources are kind of that tough, right? I mean, you don't have trees or anything.
Yeah, you're not going to go fell a bunch of logs to be able to make clubs or staves or anything like that. And so, now, I fully believe that the Lord had prepared them. So he had provided them what they needed for that. But I doubt it was more than they needed. So there you go. But this outcome is totally dependent on God's sovereignty. Moses had the staff. If you guys remember, when he came before Pharaoh, that was the staff that he would touch the water and it would turn to blood and all those different things. That staff was a representation of God's power and leadership over the Israelites. It was not magical. It was not magical, but God represented his power through that. And I don't know about this. This is my own conjecture. I just have this sense that here they are, and it wasn't like a mountain. He wasn't up on some huge mountain. It just as a hill.
Oh,
And so, you can just imagine something we don't have here, that there was a hill there. But I come from a place where we had hills. And as they're battling here on the plain, and how many of them there was, we don't know that. But a substantial number of people. But I just have this idea that as they were fighting, that they would keep glancing up on the hill to see whether Moses had the staff, right? And I think in a very real sense, as long as that staff was up, they were encouraged.
Right.
We fight for the Lord fights for us.
Right.
And that staff was up. I just have that sense they're keeping an eye on Moses. If so, it really talks about how we encourage others with our faithfulness and obedience, right? I mean, Moses was a new leader. They'd already rebelled against Moses a couple times, right? We talked about that. They came out of the Red Sea. They saw the entire Egyptian army defeated. 3 days later, they were moaning and crying about the fact they didn't have any water. And they kind of moaned and cried all the time. And you can see, literally, we're a couple of chapters away from the crossing here. And, matter of fact, what is it? Exodus 14 is the crossing of the Red Sea. Exodus 15 is when Moses sings his great song of praise, and then by the end of that chapter, they're bumming out because they don't have any water. So it happened pretty quick. But at least at this point, they saw Moses as their leader, the deliverer out of Egypt, and so they were encouraged by him. So 1, victory doesn't come easy. 2, victory is won at the spiritual level. And 3rd, it's the big one. Victory may require adjustment.
What?
Adjustment.
Judgment.
Adjustment. Because if you look at it this way, initially, Moses goes up, Aaron and Hur, they go up with him. Now Aaron, that's Moses' brother, his older brother. He would become what? What would his big role be in the Exodus, in the wilderness? What was his job? It's Bible 101, guys. He become the high priest. He's the high priest. Right? And all the priests of Aaron, all the high priests were descended from Aaron. Right? Her, we don't know so much about. Okay? There is Josephus, the Jewish historian, writes that Hur was actually married to Moses' sister Miriam, but that's not in the Bible. So we don't know exactly where that came from. But and there's another Hur mentioned that actually was, I think, the grandson of Caleb, or he was the son of Caleb and the grandfather of the guy who did a lot of the crafting of the different items for the tabernacle. But Hur was maybe not the same name, so we're not certain about that. So he shows up a couple of times. As a matter of fact, a little bit later on in Exodus, he shows up when Moses goes up to the mountain, to Sinai, that he said, if you guys have any issues, civil issues, see Aaron and Hur. Right? So Hur does have, obviously, some authority among the group. But that's about what we see of him. So, but as he and Aaron go up on the hill with Moses, it doesn't seem like they've got a lot to do. They're just up there to be his posse or something, right? Sorry, I shouldn't say that kind of thing. But as we're up here, and again, you look at it, it says, in verse 12, Moses' hands became heavy. Think about this. Moses is 80 at this point, right? But even if you're 20, how long can you do this?
Exactly.
How long can you do this?
We found out in boot camp.
That's
When
right.
we had to
Hold your guns up?
We had to run. We had to run around the grinder with the guns up. Now it's only a 5-pound gun, and we thought no problem. 10 minutes, your arms are.
Yeah.
You're like this, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that's just not something that we naturally do.
No.
You cannot defeat gravity.
No.
You cannot defeat gravity. At least not standing on planet Earth. You cannot. And so he's getting tired. So what do? They recognize that he wasn't going to be able to keep it up, right? Because you can imagine he was like this, and then his hands would drop,
Oh, yeah.
and the Amalekites, and then he'd kind of get a second wind, and his arms would go back up, and then, you know, so after a couple of rotations of this, Aaron and Hur are like, we got to do something to help Moses here. So what do? They find a rock, they shove it under him, and they plop him down on the rock. The beauty of that is, if you think about it, so now Moses is sitting down, and his arms are up like that. They can stand next to him, and they can just hold his arm, right? It's not a stress for them, right? Yeah, just mechanically speaking, I can do this all day long.
It's still a stress for Moses, though.
Yeah, but it is, but his arms are being held,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's just like, huh.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. So they recognize that is brilliant if you really think about it. Because if they had just said, well, let's stand beside him and we'll hold. Now their arms are going to get tired. So now all of them are going to be shaking after 10 minutes, right? So they saw the situation, you know, how much God directed this. Because really, if you look at this passage, you don't see Moses having this great prayer meeting before they went to this battle. But, you know, I'm fully of the mindset that Moses was walking with God pretty darn close. You know, every time Paul did something in the book of Acts, didn't come with a big prayer meeting before it. But we see Paul very much connected with what? And we only see a few examples even of Jesus praying. But do you think Jesus was pretty plugged in with the Father?
No.
I think so. So
Kind of, sort of.
Scripture doesn't always give us all the pre-up, but you know, as I look at this, I think that Moses was pretty plugged in, and I think these guys were as well. And as they stood there and they recognized what was going on, they had the discernment to say, let's change tactics so that we can have the victory. Do you see that? And you know, you guys know the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over the same way and expecting different results. You're just not going to get it.
Yeah.
But I've seen that so many times with Christians individually and with churches where they just keep doing the same thing. And, well, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we've always done it.
Tell that to the Eagles.
Yeah. Change is
My
good.
Philadelphia Eagles.
Okay,
They did the same thing over and over and lost big time.
there you go. Eventually somebody figures out what you're up to. So, you know, that's the reality is we can absolutely be in God's will. But God gives us the discernment to sometimes recognize the fact that we need to change the method to be effective.
I was middle school director. Talk about being in the middle. The high school had the best hours and best class size, and the elementary had little classes, up to 20. But middle school, caught in the middle, we had 37 kids per hour, and started at 7 in the morning. So I'm the middle school director, representing the complainers. You know?
That's so they can get on the bus
You needed
and drive
somebody
for
to
soccer
hold it
at 5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It had a lot to do with the bus schedule. I was a bus driver.
There it
Oh,
is.
yeah, and it was so, I fought them for 15 years. I was in middle school, and I'm thinking, this story applies to me. I needed it back then.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, maybe you can share it with somebody that you might still know. So guys, I just really, this passage speaks so much to me from that idea that even when you're in God's will, it's not always going to come easy. You got to recognize that even though you may see the physical manifestation, there's a spiritual aspect that's behind it. And that if it's not always going right, we may need to rethink our methods, right? I mean, that's absolutely the case. Individually, that works for us. But I want to talk to you about a more global scale. I mentioned this at the very beginning, but I want to come back to this just for a couple of minutes. And I want to talk to you about a ministry called E17. E17 for Exodus 17.
Oh, wow.
The church that I pastored in Virginia has gone through a lot of different permutations since we left in 2013. And one of the things when I left there, just going to be a quick story. When we left to go to Hawaii, I had connected with two other pastors in that community that we had decided that they and the church I was leaving were going to partner together to do some really great things in the community. And one thing led to another, and that didn't happen. And then the church called another pastor, and he ended up not really fitting in with where they wanted to go. And so what ended up happening was the church went through a period of struggle, because it's like everybody kind of bailed on them for all intents and purposes. And they reached out to their local association for help. And essentially the association came back and said, well, if you're ready to sell the church, we got another fellowship that would be willing to take it over. Like, we didn't ask for that. We want help.
Right.
We want help. You know, you guys have resources. We want help to help us get going. And so what came out of that was a real spirit in that fellowship to help other churches that are struggling. Because right now, all across America, the churches that are struggling, I mean, churches are closing their doors. I think I read something recently, 100 churches a week. And it may be a month, but it's one of the, even if it's
It's
a
still
month,
a lot.
that's still a lot. There are churches closing their doors all the time. Lots of times what it is they become older. They've not kind of kept up,
Oh, yeah,
right?
exactly.
The neighborhoods have changed. There's all kinds of reasons why. But ultimately what happens is they whittle down to where they've got just a,
10 parishioners, yeah.
whose music's playing?
That's
Yeah.
my alarm to go see Jennifer and plant seeds, but
Oh, to plant seeds. Okay. It's nice music at least, Susan.
it'll probably be done by 11:30.
Well, we're getting close. What we discovered was nobody really wants, there's not nobody, I shouldn't say that. There's a limited number of people who have as their charter to help churches that are struggling to revitalize, right? If God has called a church to hand its building over to somebody else and to go on to another chapter, that's fine. But what we're starting to experience is a lot of churches out there that for one reason or another are struggling, and they're not ready to throw in the towel. And so they're saying, help us, help us, help us. And lots of times help comes with a big price tag, quite frankly. And so what the group in Virginia, which they renamed themselves, and they're known now as Interlink Fellowship. They're based in Richmond, Virginia. And I'm actually, I'm in an elder group with my buddy Preston, who some of you guys have met, and their pastor, Steve, and we meet every Wednesday and talk about stuff that's going on at Interlink. I'm not really that concerned with their internal stuff that's happening there. Where my role is helping them with the E17 ministry. And so what E17 has done is their heart and desire is to use their skill set, their experience, their gifting to help other churches that are struggling. And the reason we call it E17 was we said, we want to be your Aaron and Hur. And raise your arms and help you be effective for the kingdom. And that's where that came from. And so, and we see all of these things. We see churches struggling. It's not easy. We see them fighting over things like money and resources and neighborhood and those sorts of things, instead of recognizing lots of times it is a spiritual challenge that they're actually in. And sadly, the main thing that we see is lots of times churches that are starting to do this have a low willingness to change how they're doing things.
I've seen so much where I've seen churches completely lose like their whole youth programs because
Yes.
the elders were like, they've got to sit in with us, they got to do with us. And not be willing to approach the youth differently.
Now, to be honest with you, I'm kind of down that path. I have a different philosophy of ministry. We'll get there at some point. Right?
Yeah.
But I'll give you a real vivid version of this. Is there was a church that we knew of in Richmond that closed their doors and were selling the building. They had replanted out in the countryside, and the reason they had was this was a predominantly, at the time they started the church, it was a predominantly white church. The neighborhood around them had gentrified, and so there were a lot of African American folks that moved in, Hispanic folks, and they did want to minister to those people.
Oh, how horrible.
Really?
They had
That's terrible.
get this, they had basketball goals in their parking lot, and they wouldn't let the neighborhood kids come play with the basketball.
Oh, that's terrible.
And so they would rather
Oh,
fold it up, sell the building, and we'll move out somewhere where there's people like us,
well, that's not
right?
Christian.
And I just thought,
Well, that's
but you know, guys,
church.
that was
Yeah.
that was a spiritual problem,
Yeah.
but it was also a methodology problem, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Oh my God.
So sometimes when you come in this ministry that I'm talking to you, sometimes you've got to say the hard things, right? Sometimes you have to say the really hard things. And we've talked about it a lot about, you know, when are we going to talk about what they're preaching, what they're teaching. You know, if they're teaching, if they're teaching heresy, we're probably not going to want to help them unless they're willing to change. But, you know, we've decided we're not going to get in there, we're not going to tussle with them if they're from, you know, it doesn't matter what denomination you're from, that doesn't matter. If you're a God-believing fellowship, we'll help you, right? We're not concerned about their polity, whether or not they've got deacons or elders or a board or that kind of thing. We're not, you know, even though I believe in male leadership in the church, if they've got female leadership, we're not going to fight over that kind of thing. That's not our business. That's not what we're about, right? We're about helping them become all that God wants them to be. So why don't I share all this with you? And I could go a lot further, but I just want to give you a thumbnail sketch, because this is a really, to be honest with you, it's why Christine and I are in Northeast Florida. When we came back from Hawaii, and we were and this has been going on now, we're a couple 3 years into this E17 thing. Now, naturally, what I probably would have done otherwise is we would have gone found a church somewhere in this area, moved to that community and become the pastor of that church. That's what you do. So coming back here and not having a church and not having a job, it's been a, well, victory doesn't always come easy. I'm living that right now. But we came here because we could reach a lot of the Southeast and be able to help churches, you know, could get to churches to consult them. Because what we want to be able to do is say, this church maybe needs somebody to help them with accounting. This church maybe has need to put together a good praise team. Maybe this church needs work with youth ministry or children's ministry. Maybe they need help with evangelism. You know, there's all things church need help. We want to be able to go and involve ourselves in them at no charge to be able to get them off the ground. Because lots of times another problem with a struggling church, they don't have a lot of money. They're struggling. Right? And so I bring this to you guys just to let you know this. If you want to be part of the Gilgal Project, you will by de facto be a part of the E17 network. Okay? What does that mean? It just means that because I'm leading the Gilgal Project, we'll be a member of the E17 network. Whether you want to be at any part of that along the way as we move forward, that is absolutely between you and the Lord. But, you know, as opportunities avail themselves, I'll let you guys know what's going on. But my hope and desire is that we're going to be able to build this ministry locally, and then the Lord's going to use me to go and help other churches. I mean, I've got a lot of experience in this kind of thing. Been everything in a church you can be, I think, except the account. I've never been the church treasurer,
And you haven't done nursery.
and I haven't done nursery.
I'm with you there.
Nursery.
I've done youth, I've done kids, I've been a deacon, I've been an elder, I've been a
I bet
trustee.
you haven't been
I've
an
done-
altar boy.
No, well, that's not Baptist church. We don't have
Yeah, but I've taken up the offer.
those. Yes, sir. Absolutely, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah,
You're sitting there and they come, hey, I need some help. You want to come back and help me with the offering?
absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Right.
I remember being a kid, man. If they tapped you to come do it because they needed one more man, I thought that was an honor,
Oh,
It
yeah.
is.
right?
Bruce, let me share something with you militarily. The number 17 is big in the military. I don't know what it means, but the number 17 is the letter Q, is the 17th letter of
Okay.
the alphabet. And Q clearance in the military is the highest clearance you can get. And the 17 with the Q, if you look at John F. Kennedy's memorial, it comes out as a Q. So it's something with 17 and John F. Kennedy.
Okay.
So,
Oh.
yeah, if you look at his memorial sometime, you'll see the Q there. But yeah, 17 is it's a spiritual number, something going on with the military. I don't know exactly what it is, but.
I have to look into that.
Because Hugh Clarence,
Just had a conversation with Ann about that, how
Oh,
in
yeah.
Italy, 17 is bad luck.
She
Oh,
posted
yeah,
that,
she
that
did.
13 was good, I
Yeah.
read them, it was
Oh.
interesting.
Yeah, it was.
And 17 is
Yeah, well,
bad.
17 in this case is very good. And we named it
Yes.
E17. We thought about
Yes.
calling it the Aaron Her Ministry. We went through a lot of things, but E17 just seemed to have kind of a modern kind of flavor to it. So
wasn't
Kinda
there
like
a
1122?
Hugh book in the, not the Bible, but
Yeah, exactly.
Bible Hugh book? Wasn't there?
That was their address.
oh, there were
Oh,
some
but
key
I heard it's
sources.
because
Few
they always
sources.
Yeah, you're
started
talking about
church
the
late.
Old
Yeah.
Testament.
No, it's the address of their first building was 1122.
Oh, I didn't, I.
Well, we're not advertising other churches.
No, we're not.
I didn't know that.
I'm just saying, you know, E17 is better than,
Oh, I like these, it's short.
Well, it's, you know, it just kind of had a modern kind of feel to it, but I wanted you guys to be aware of it, because as we go through these next however longs, you know, I've got different things going on, and I want you to be aware of it, and in anywhere you feel like you can be used, we want to do that, right? And so, thank you for letting me share that with you, and that really is the goal, and I'll even say this, I'm hoping, and the reason, one of the other reasons we started this fellowship was because I went to a little local church down here that was struggling, and we felt like maybe that's what the Lord wanted us to do. And so we visited this church. It was the last church we wanted to attend. I kid you not. Really was the last church I wanted to go to, because it was sad. I'm not going to tell you which one it is. But it was sitting there that the Lord said, no, you need to start a house church. And so I was like, okay, Lord, cool. But I would love nothing more than to go down there and knock on their door and say, how can we help you guys become all that the Lord wants you to be? Because guys, every church needs to be thriving, doesn't it? The one, every church that's preaching the gospel, you know, the ones that aren't, like the one you were talking about, Carol, that's preaching error, you know, they need to be healthy too, actually. They need to have the truth,
But
right?
the thing is, they don't know they're not healthy.
I know. But I mean, with as many as are closing, we have a great opportunity, not just to tell people about Jesus, but to help these churches that are out there become healthy. And so that's my part.